Well, let's go, because we want to honor your time, and then it's taken a little while to get us started. Welcome, everybody. So this is a session where we are going to be talking about where we're at with the vision plan, which we've been working on for the past, working on receiving your feedback for the past 6-ish months, but have been working on kind of generating information for over the past few years. I just wanted to thank everyone from the Jigsaw Architect team and the First U Vision team who has taken us this far. Let's see if. There we go. Okay. So you all, I think, who are in person have a copy of this slideshow already. I would encourage you to actually just be present to the presentation because there's basics in the slideshow, but I'm going to be sharing more information. And those who are virtual will talk you through it. These are the values that have guided us in what we're imagining will be kind of the next 20-ish years of work in the congregation. The first one is accessibility, because we know that we want as much of our space to be usable for as many people as possible, and ideally as much of our space to be usable for everyone as possible. Flexibility is another one of our important values, knowing that the way that space is used changes from generation to generation, and we want our space to be as flexible as possible to be ready for whatever is coming. Preservation is the third one. Obviously, we have some work to do to shore up our building, make it safe, and make the building envelope secure, the building systems updated. We also want to honor our architectural heritage here, but also update the congregation's look and feel so that it represents who we are now, not who we were 130 years ago. Sustainability undergirds everything that we've been talking about in this plan, particularly that we know that renovating a historic building has a much lower environmental impact than new construction, even new green construction. So choosing to stay where we are and make this place more efficient and more usable is an enormous environmental choice in and of itself. And they're going to be doing efficiency improvements throughout the building. And then, of course, feasibility. We want to do a plan that we think we'll be able to actually fund over the coming handful of years. And that also will be able to be permitted, because we know that we're a historic building and some things just will be very, very hard to get through the permitting process. So we've been thinking about that, making sure that what we're proposing is doable. I still feel like I'm echoey in here. It's okay. All right. Okay, here's the timeline ahead. Right now, we're trying to solidify the vision plan. So that's this plan that we're talking through today. Our hope is that the congregation can give us whatever final tweaks that we want, that you notice need to happen, and that we'll vote it together.
Yeah, December.
Great. And that we'll be able to vote on it as a whole in the late spring, potentially at our our congregational meeting, or maybe at a separate meeting. We're planning on embarking on a capital campaign this fall. That would be to raise the money from the congregation, as well as Friends of 2125 donors, to fund the first phase of the campaign. Most of you know we've already received a $250,000 grant to help replace our roof. We're also applying for other grants, and that process will be ongoing. And what we're imagining is that once we have a sense of what money we have available, we'll begin, and maybe actually we'll begin the roof project at least before we fully know what's available. But we'll move forward on phase 1 of a capital project. So that'll be some essential work for the building envelope and some first group of vision projects, which we're calling, for lack of a better term, the projects that are like priorities for us living out our mission and vision. We think that that'll maybe start in spring of 25. Maybe it'll take a couple of years. The full plan itself is much bigger than what we'll be able to do probably in this first phase, so that the rest of the work will take place, maybe some things kind of project by project, and likely at least 1 or 2 more significant capital campaigns to carry out the full work. The goal for this session, and we're gonna have a couple of sessions like this, 3 sessions like this, is that before our finalization and vote, everyone really gets a sense of what is gonna change in the building when we complete this plan and provide some feedback to us. And also that the congregation can inform what will actually go into phase 1, which is gonna be, 25% or 30% of the work will be able to be done in this first phase, and we have some choices to make together. Okay, so once we're done with all of this work, going back to like when we actually get to do it all, what's gonna have changed? We're gonna take you through the space. When you're outside of the building, a few things will have changed. One is the big one will be an entry garden. So on this side of the building, where currently there's parking and a little bit of a garden and a ramp, there's gonna be a more interesting and intricate entry garden. It's gonna be accessible, that will bring a ramp up both to the sanctuary and to the lobby. There'll be some built-in seating and like conversation space, so it's a little bit more of a usable garden space for us while also getting better accessibility into both entrances. The porch will have some improvements around lighting, but we're also talking about some lighting or art installations that we could use. And I'll show you some pictures in a little bit that would help us kind of marry whatever priorities are coming out for us, justice priorities maybe, with our historic architecture, and kind of layer them on top of each other in an interesting way, to try to carry out our mission and our vision and be more hospitable. If you're outside of the congregation, you will notice in the future that a roof has been done, that our masonry, so all of our stonework has been repaired, and that our windows have been repaired, or replaced or made more efficient. Here is a overhead view of that garden. On the sides, you'll see there's like a couple of steps where right now there's parking, and then there's a ramp here. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, you can see. So if you're using the ramp, you'd roll in up here, and then you could slide up ramps over here or up ramps over here. There's a few steps, so a couple of other ways to get in also. And then seating built in so that we can have like conversations out there and enjoy each other's company in the outside space. Here is, and below that picture, you'll see some examples from Grace Church, which is a San Francisco congregation that has a very traditional look and feel the way we do, that has used projection. So on this picture in the right, and another kind of art installation to transform the feel of it. Well, it's not removing the traditional look, but it's kind of layering additional things onto it. Okay, now taking us into the first floor, we're going to talk about the sanctuary, the lobby, the parish room, and the chapel. And again, just a reminder, we're talking about the full vision plan, not necessarily what we'll be able to get done in this first phase, because we won't be able to get it all done in the first phase. Let's talk you through it. Sanctuary, seating. We're imagining removing some, potentially all of the pews. That question will be decided at the point at which we would actually be ready to make that decision. We know we would probably want to remove some of the pews at least to be able to make some flexible seating. Where those pews are or exactly how it would work, we're not entirely sure, but we know that we could have flexible seating that would allow us to have worship in the round, that would allow us to have banquets in here, or just different shapes of gathering in this same space. It will be more accessible space. There'll be a better ramp from the lobby in that will be ADA compliant. The chancel is also going to be modified, so there'll be a ramp up into the chancel, so people who use wheelchairs can also lead worship from the chancel, and similar for choir members or anybody who's presenting from the chancel. There will be air conditioning in here and better heat. Woo-hoo! And we're going to upgrade the lighting as well. This is a pretty dark space. The other thing that we have not figured out exactly how we will do, so there's still work to be done to figure out what we would do, is to update our visual theology. And what we've mostly been talking about is layering new imagery on top of what we already have here, rather than removing what we currently have. If that makes sense. So in this picture, this top picture, all the space that's yellow is basically all of our blue walls in here. we could like paint a mural on the blue walls that speak to our history with abolition and with peace, the peace movement. We could have a mural that dedicated to Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. We could do all kinds of stuff, or if not a mural, we could create new memorials or new art on that space. There's also some of the pictures I showed you earlier, the way that Grace Church did use projections and use their vertical space is another thing that we could do. There's also some pictures down here at the bottom that show Hagia Sophia in Istanbul and the Church of the Advocate, which is here in Philadelphia, which are both, again, traditional Christian spaces that have layered either multi-religious imagery because Hagia Sophia became a mosque, or justice imagery that speaks to the mission of the congregation like Church of the Advocate has. So we wouldn't do exactly that, but those are some thoughts of what other congregations have done similar. And then the windows is the other thing. Windows, some of the windows we know are going to, are in really rough shape. Some of them will likely need to be removed before we know whether we'll be able to restore them or immediately if we could restore them. So what's likely to happen is that a couple of the ones that are really struggling will be taken down and we'll put clear glass in as we figure out what to do with them. And I think that that'll be another decision point in the future around how we move forward at that point. Okay, lobby. The lobby is going to look different. Right now, where the sort of kitchenette and the stairs down to the play yard are, as well as our current bathroom on the first floor and coat closet, is going to be reconfigured so that there's a new ADA compliant ramp that takes us out to the play yard, that there'll be 2 ADA compliant bathrooms in place of the one that we currently have. And instead of the kitchenette where it currently is, there'll be a new kitchenette that opens directly into the parish room. That's a reconfiguration both around accessibility and flexibility, obviously, that we think could use our space much better than our current use. There'll also be an elevator. Woo-hoo. In the chapel and the parish room, in the chapel, we're primarily talking about can you guys still hear me virtually? Sorry, hold on one second. Ginny, can you nod if you can hear me virtually? What'd you say, Jeff? Okay, but we're good now? Okay, cool. Let me just, that so I can see better. So in the chapel, we're talking about removing the pews, replacing with flexible seating. There's a possibility that we could do sort of flexible seating similar to this diagram up at the top, which is just kind of individual seats, hopefully really beautiful seats, or we could do sort of soft seating and make it feel more like a lounge in there. That's another possibility. In general, the idea is to renovate the chapel, the systems and the lighting, as well as removing the pews and making it into a space that can be used for flexible purposes rather than kind of just sort of chapel feel purposes. There's not that much that we're talking about doing with the parish room. But one of the things that we think is likely is that we'll need some more storage on this first floor, especially if we do flexible seating in the sanctuary. So we're talking about potentially using the parish room for storage, although that's another decision point that would come down the line. Okay. Basement. There will be an elevator down to the basement. How many of you have heard us talk about the elevator before? Has anyone not heard us talk about the elevator before? Okay, I'm not going to do a long explanation then, but what we've discovered in this process is that it is very very cost prohibitive for us to do an elevator that could do both the basement, first floor, and the third floor. So what we're proposing is likely to do an elevator that just goes to the basement that would open up, that would make something like 70% of the space in the building ADA compliant when we do that. That would give us a lot more options for how to use full accessible space in those 2 floors. Taking us down to the basement, there will be this new bank of restrooms that will be, rather than like a men's room and a women's room, the common thing that a lot of places are doing now is sort of one big space. And instead of sort of stalls that don't feel very private, like kind of little private toilet rooms and then shared sinks, that's what's being proposed. There's also likely to be an extra bathroom up here in this corner, which will potentially be kind of a family restroom or maybe have a shower, which would enable us maybe to have a homeless shelter at some point down in the future. We are going to do some, let's see, what's next? Griffin Hall. Griffin Hall will have some ramping or a wheelchair lift that gets us down there. It will be air conditioned, and then there'll be these two light wells that we're planning on kind of digging that will bring some daylight into Griffin Hall, which is currently entirely artificially lit. We're going to renovate the kitchen. Whoop, whoop. And the Little Miracles daycare space, which you see over on the right side of the screen right now. This is an enormous space. It's the size of the entire parish room and most of the chapel, for those of you who haven't been down there. It's very large. And we're talking about doing a renovation there that's not a particularly dramatic one, but one that would allow us to use that space a little bit better for things like meetings, for children's religious education, maybe for events. It would be a flexible space that is also ADA compliant once we have an elevator that goes down there. All right, second and third floors. Honestly, we're not talking about doing that much to the second and third floors, primarily because we don't imagine that we can make them accessible. And so they are not the priority of this plan because we're prioritizing as much space being accessible as possible. We will still do energy efficiency and electrical and lighting and fire safety and ventilation improvements throughout those two spaces. But the way to get an elevator up there, which is technically possible. If anyone here had $3 million that you just want to devote to an elevator that would go to the third floor as well as the basement, we welcome your gift. But there's a lot of code things that just make things extra challenging, which is why that elevator project would be so much more costly to get up to the third floor. So that's what we're planning for the second and third floors. That is most of what we're talking about for the full vision plan. That's what we're imagining for the next generation of the building. In honor of giving as much time to discussion as possible, if you guys are cool with it, I'm going to move into what we're talking about for phase one, which is this first 25 to 30% of the plan that we're imagining doing first. So we're going to talk about what's the essential stuff that we have to do, that we can't avoid doing, even if we wanted to, and what are our first priorities beyond our essential work. So the essential stuff, this is the stuff that has to happen because the building is in trouble. If it doesn't, it's things like the roof, preservation of the building envelope, any places that water is getting into the building, we're going to try to fix. There's some systems upgrades and safety upgrades, some of which need to happen just because it would be better for them to happen. And some of them are triggered by code compliance. So some things like when you touch anything at all in a building, you all of a sudden have to bring it completely up to code. And a lot of the building is not up to the current code. So it's some stuff that would be kind of dramatic and may not otherwise be a priority, but we will have to do for code compliance. We estimate that that's going to cost something like $2 to $3 million, honestly, to do just the essential stuff. We're hoping it's closer to 2 million. And what we're hoping is possible is that we can raise something like $3 million, which would ideally give us maybe another $1 million of funds to use to advance some of the other priorities that we've been talking about as a congregation. And particularly the way that we've been thinking about it is trying to unlock flexible and accessible space. So there's a lot of spaces in the building that are sort of locked out to us, either because things like the chapel, which you can use as a chapel and you can sort of use for other purposes, but it's kind of awkward for lots of purposes, or things like the sanctuary, which is intolerably hot in the summer. And so we basically don't use the sanctuary in the summer because of not having air conditioning. The basement, we basically don't use for the congregation because it's not accessible for wheelchairs or anyone who can't do stairs. So we're talking about some projects that combined together could unlock some of that space and give us more space to use, as well as that's particularly flexible and accessible for the congregation. Does that make sense? Okay. So the two paths that seem to us to be the most likely kind of groupings of like $1 million that could get us to unlock some important space, I'm going to talk about in a sec. One basically talks about some spaces on level 1. The other one talks primarily about gaining access to the basement and then making some changes in the basement. So yeah, these are all the things that need to happen. The building envelope has some problems. You can see that like there's a piece of the window that's missing here and down here under Good Shepherd Jesus's feet. There's places where the masonry has spalled, which means that pieces of masonry have just popped right out. We need to fix them. The roof needs to be replaced. All the other things I already mentioned. And when we're talking about vision projects beyond the essentials, here's what it would look like for the level 1 grouping. And again, these are things that we're really looking for feedback from you all on, but we may not have the groupings quite right. We may not be able to raise quite as much money as would be needed for either of these groupings. We might raise a little bit more, which would allow us to do a little bit more of the work. But we're really looking for your feedback because we know that what will be best for us is that if we as a congregation can come to agreement on how to move forward, what our priorities are together, that's the best chance that we have for actually being able to raise the money to do any of it. So we're not looking at like voting on path 1 or path A or path B. We're really looking to hear from you about whether these are good groupings, whether you would group things differently, and which ones might represent how you see our values the best. So the first floor, this would be primarily either path. We're talking about changing the visual theology of the sanctuary, so that's probably going to happen no matter what. This path would do that lobby project that we talked about, so changing the configuration of the bathrooms and the kitchenette, so that there's 2 ADA compliant bathrooms, a new kitchenette that opens directly into the parish room, and a ramp down to the play yard. So we could use that space more often. For those of you who haven't been out there, like it could be a lovely little outdoor reception space if we put some like pretty lights and some new plants out there and stuff like that. So that's sort of what we're talking about, is making it usable and beautiful for more functions than just a play yard, which is right now a flexible function. We're talking about also renovating the chapel, so removing the pews and doing the full renovation around ventilation and lighting and a better job doing a full renovation of the chapel and really making it a lovely, flexible space. We're talking about adding air conditioning to the sanctuary and also Griffin Hall, and some improvements to the porch to make it more welcoming out there. The other interim improvements that we're talking about, which are things that we're going to be probably working on anyway, is probably beautifying the play yard a bit and a lobby to sanctuary ramp. So that's path A that we're imagining. Path B would be a little bit different. This one would help us gain access to the basement. So it would be doing the elevator down to the basement. It would also be doing the visual theology in the sanctuary. We plan on doing that either way. Once there's an elevator down to the basement, there's still 2 other levels down in the basement. There's 3 basement levels. So we're talking about a basement elevator and then probably a wheelchair lift that would get you down to the other 2 levels in the basement. It would be renovating the bathrooms to that new kind of bathroom configuration that we talked about earlier, and doing some renovations in the Little Miracles daycare space again, so that space, we could start using that as accessible children's RE space. We could use it for smaller meetings, because right now most of our gathering spaces are big. So for more intimate meetings and gatherings, we could use that space a little bit better. We know that would not solve all of the problems on the first floor that are really important to people. So we'd be talking about probably also doing some interim improvements or facelifts on the first floor. One would be, again, that lobby to sanctuary ramp, making the play yard nicer. We're talking about probably removing the pews in the chapel no matter what. It just wouldn't be also upgrading the lighting and putting in new beautiful seating. It would probably be like using the stacking chairs that I'm sitting on now. But we could make that space flexible, but not as lovely as we would like, for a low cost. And then also the kitchenette and the first floor bathroom, we think we could leave those in place and do like a low cost facelift, basically. So like retile the bathroom. Take out the cabinets and put in like a little IKEA kitchen cabinet situation in the kitchenette. It wouldn't be what we want. It wouldn't be a better configuration like what the architects designed for us, but it would reduce the awfulness of some of the current spaces on the first floor. And that's what we're imagining for path B. And that's all I have to present to you.